represents the different positioning of the bank.
Alison, do we have any visibility?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I will place an order to sell short Japanese yen. And it's sold short. I'm selling short at 107.123. Okay. Position opened at Japanese yen against United States dollar at 107.123.
Vaccine, and even then there's questions around the timing. There's still a significant things really need to play out here, and even as I said, the banks are taking these big provisions, but these are all basically guesstimates. So the banks are sort of factoring in the current base case scenario, but they really don't know. And so while some banks and some people have used the word peak, I would just use the word cushion in the sense that we know that they've providing some cushion for the second half, but we don't know if it's peak. We don't know if it's conservative until we can really get some more economic data.
So interesting. We had James Gorman was on Bloomberg Television earlier this morning with Jonathan Farrow and Shonali Bosick, and I think he was, extolling the virtues of their strategy of kind of the wealth management, despite the fact that they had a big trading quarter. Does the street still give them credit for kind of how Mr. Gorman has kind of changed the focus of this company over the last decade?
I think the street does give them a credit in terms of recognizing that the wealth business provides more stability, but you can't ignore the volatility that comes from trading. That's working for them really well this quarter. And in general, their model is the best positioned among the six banks for the current environment, right? So there's sort of the long-term view, and then there's also vulnerability to a cycle. And their model probably has the most protection to the cycle, not just because they have less lending, but because the wealth business, should be sort of more of a recurring revenue type business than these, huge doubles of trading that we're getting. But of course, it also does depend on asset prices and flows into that business. The good news is that with higher asset prices, again, we're entering in this quarter with a relatively higher run rate. But if you look at the returns on equity, that's the key metric for banks. Morgan Stanley has really improved that metric over time, helped by their shift. And certainly they played out well this quarter, and for this year, they may have among the best.
Well, they are certainly being rewarded by the market, up about 3%. Bank of America is down. Alison Williams, Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you. Let's head now to our 99.1 studios in Washington, D.C. to Nathan Hager for World and National Headlines.
Bonnie, there is no let-up to the coronavirus in Florida. The state reported a new one-day record for deaths from COVID-19 at 156. Infections jumped another 4.6%. That is back above the 7-day average. Alberto Carvalho is superintendent of schools in Miami-Dade County.
As long as the number of hospitalizations continue to increase, we're not in the position of reopening schools. It is actually counterintuitive and dangerous.
The state actually reported a slight drop in hospitalizations today, but with the pandemic still raging in Florida, the Republican National Committee announced today it is scaling down its convention next month in Jacksonville. Only delegates will be allowed in the first 3 days. When President Trump accepts the nomination on the fourth day, guests and alternate delegates will be able to attend. 6 GOP senators have said they will not be going to the convention next month. Senate Democrats say they want $350 billion for minority communities in the next stimulus bill. Leader Chuck Schumer says they've been hit especially hard by the pandemic and recession. That would add to the $3.5 trillion proposal recently passed in the House. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he'll have a Republican plan capped at $1 trillion trillion next week. New York State prosecutors are accusing lawyers for President Trump of trying to stall compliance with a subpoena as part of a strategy to delay their investigation into hush money payments to a porn star. An assistant district attorney just made that charge at a hearing in Manhattan after the Supreme Court ruled that the president does not have absolute immunity from state grand jury investigations. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
You may not be getting on planes yet.
At what point do we start to see this elusive V-shaped recovery?
But for detailed, up-to-the-minute news of Asia, you don't have to.
Do you think that the tension has the possibility to destabilize Asian assets?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
Do you expect some of these companies that come and list here to then delist in New York?
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
The doors are opening.
When is that moment out in the distant future?
Some things will be as they were, others forever changed.
The restaurant industry will never be the same.
Follow every new development here on Bloomberg Radio.
What do we need in terms of maybe the new school of economic thought?
Because the next best thing to magic is insight.
It may take nearly a decade for the U.S. economy to recover.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
You're fierce. You take care of business and don't hold back. Taking care of your health shouldn't be any different. You know when something's off. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and rashes. Listen to your body. It could be lupus. We're here to help you take control. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Economics.
All this doom and gloom was out.
How do we control coronavirus now? Listen to Steph. She's a bus driver.
Now that people are using public transport again, we really need to make sure that we keep each other safe. Passengers need to stay 2 meters apart. If that's not possible, make it at least 1 meter. I want to see everyone wearing face coverings over their mouth and nose unless you've got a good reason not to. And when you get to where you're going, you need to wash your hands. We've still got to play our part.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Are you ready to play?
This summer, ITV Hub is fully loaded with loads more full series.
It's gonna get messy.
Yeah, like it's fuller than ever. From Love Island to Liar, we have divas lined up back to back.
Filmy and Sister.
From the GC and the Ibiza Weekender reps to the Real Housewives, it's round full of lots and lots of...
This is getting too much now.
Laughs, tears and smiles. It's crammed full with full series like Quiz, Flesh and Blood, Harry's Heroes and Manx in Mumbai. We've grown, expanded and just gone a bit extra this summer.
Give me some more.
ITV Hub fully loaded this summer.
The best experience possible.
Did we mention it's looking fuller than ever?
Short on time? Don't worry. You can still get your cook on with Asda. Get 3 Asda ready meals for just £5.50. Like our beef lasagna or our tomato and mozzarella panette bake. Hang up your oven gloves. We've got dinner covered. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores and lines, subject to availability. Meals 400 grams, £2.10 each.
Honda. We're not a car company. We're more of a listening company. And now our ears have brought our attention to where people feel most comfortable. The lounge. So we asked ourselves, what could Honda do to innovate in this space? Well, how about more space? Calm and uncluttered, with modern yet retro styling. And built-in screens compatible with your games console. It's the most comfortable lounge you've ever driven. Introducing the new Honda E, our small electric city car. Honda, the power of dreams.
Just one cornetto.
Ada, love, your mum's on the phone.
Give it to me. No, the phone I mean.
Ada, is that you?
Give me cornetto. Your turn, Mum. Sing it.
Oh, from Walls Ice Cream.
Yes, Mum. Love it.
Deliciously creamy, crunchy wafer cone, and the secret chocolate hidden in the tip. Connect with the ones you love this summer. There's just one Cornetto from Walls Ice Cream.
So you're out for your usual run, and the best part, you're at the end of it. Especially as you knock 7 seconds off your PB. Woohoo! How did that happen? Who cares? Now that feels like winning. So roll with it and turn today into Wednesday with a scratch card. Make today a Wednesday with a scratch card from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Search Dream Big, Play Small. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Minions, did you know Sky Broadband Superfast guarantees your speed? No, Stuart, it doesn't guarantee you'll win the game. Or that your video will go viral. Or that you'll match with the love of your life. But Sky Broadband Superfast does guarantee the speed we promised or money back. So reliable, it's minion-proof. Sky, believe in better. Sky Fibre areas only. Speed measured to hub must drop below min download speed for 3 consecutive days. 1 month subscription refund. Claim up to twice in min-term after first fortnight. See sky.com.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Tech shares have led U.S. stocks lower, with investors continuing to rotate out of this year's top performers. Treasuries are up, with American initial jobless claims posting their smallest weekly decline since March. Let's take a look at the numbers, as we do every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P is down 0.7%, down 22. The Dow's down 0.3%, down 86, and the Nasdaq's down 1.7%, down 176. The 10-year is currently up 8/30 seconds with a yield of 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.3% at 41.09. COMEX gold is down 0.4% at 18.0670. The dollar yen is 107.12. The euro $1.1425, and the British pound $1.2601. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
The World Trade Organization has been in existence for 25 years, but it's never been more front of mind than in the last couple of years. President Trump and Brexit, of course, keeping the WTO in the news headlines constantly. Well, the referee at the WTO is the appellate body. Let's welcome now the former chairman of the appellate body of the WTO, Jim Baucus, distinguished university professor of global affairs at the University of Central Florida and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute as well. His latest work is The Willing World, Shaping and Sharing a Sustainable Global Prosperity, and that's out from Cambridge University Press. So, Mr. Baucus, thank you so much for joining. Where does the appellate body at the WTO stand at the moment in terms of world significance?
Well, currently, the appellate body stands still because under the rules of the WTO treaty, the appellate body cannot hear any new appeals unless it has at least 3 members. It ordinarily has 7. It currently has 1. And this is entirely because the United States under President Trump has refused to join in the needed consensus with other WTO members to appoint new judges. The significance of this is that it undermines the ability of the WTO to make binding and enforceable judgments in inevitable international trade disputes, as it has done in hundreds of cases very successfully over the past 25 years. We're now suddenly back to the days before the WTO, in which, in effect, any one country can block a ruling against it by a WTO panel. Thus, we're heading toward a situation in which anything goes, especially for the larger countries that have the political and economic leverage to get away with ignoring WTO rulings. So far, the U.S. has been one, and the only one that has tried this approach.
So, Jim, give us a sense of how you think this might play out at the WTO. Again, as Vanya was mentioning, it's been in existence for 25 years. The U.S. has been a willing and able participant in the WTO, the World Trade Organization. To the extent that we get a new administration in a matter of months, will that change perhaps the way the U.S. views its role in the WTO?
I think it will. Donald Trump is not going to change. Support him or oppose him, I think we can all agree on that. And if he's reelected, this stalemate is likely to continue with grievous effects in world trade for the United States and for all other countries. If Joe Biden is elected, I think we'll see a return by the United States to more multilateral approaches that give more emphasis to international cooperation. The WTO is one of those places in which we will see that, I think, and I predict that one of the first evidences of that new approach would be the United States joining with other members of the WTO to resume the work of the appellate body.
Mr. Baucus, I mean, we should remind people that one of the reasons why the appellate body is so important is that it protects countries really from retaliation against trade partners without fear of expressing their opinion or of not having a referee in between the two. So smaller states, might be at a disadvantage if it weren't for this kind of referee, this global referee. But as we move into a period, and we're already in it really, of countries turning inwards, of states being more important again and so on, how can the WTO appellate body referee in a world like that where even trade is almost less important?
Well, I don't think trade is less important. It's been declining during the pandemic, but I think trade links are all the more important as we go forward in the world. We have to increase global wealth so that we'll be able to address all the many problems we have, and we can't increase prosperity if we're decreasing trade. As for the appellate body, it is a panel of jurists. They are independent and impartial, a referee, as you rightly said, and it's important to have them there so that we can resolve peacefully and positively the trade disputes that inevitably occur in the 98% of all world commerce that falls within the scope of the WTO treaty. Without an impartial and independent judge of these disputes, there's much more danger that the disputes could get out of hand, especially in today's more precarious and perilous world. People forget that one of the reasons we invented the trading system in the first place after World War II was to help prevent World War III. And so far we've succeeded in that, but in order to continue to succeed in that, we need to have a global trading system based on agreed rules in which the rules are upheld fairly under the rule of law. That's where the appellate body comes in.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to continue to follow this. Jim Baucus, thanks so much for joining us. Jim is a professor of global affairs at the University of Central Florida and a former chairman of the appellate body of the World Trade Organization. I think it's a really interesting conversation, Vani, to think about the future of the World Trade Organization, what role it's going to play in global trade. As you mentioned, Vani, a lot of countries, not just the United States, a lot of countries are starting to look more inward, perhaps a little bit less international, a little bit less global, and we'll have to see if that is a trend that continues. And certainly the pandemic will certainly have some impact on that. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Money managers are looking carefully at the pullback of 1/4 to 1 6/10% on Wall Street. The Dow down 79, the Nasdaq 172, the S&P 21. Tech shares are leading the way lower. The big-name tech companies seeing shares fall anywhere from 1.5% to nearly 3%. One money manager says investors are moving money into stocks they consider safer, and it's not clear right now if this is just a pause or something more serious. Bank of America shares have been falling because it showed lower profits last quarter with the pandemic, and there's data that's raising some eyebrows too. First-time jobless claims fell only about 10,000 last week, coming in again at about 1.3 million. And just a week after Uber agreed to buy food delivery company Postmates for nearly $3 billion, it's making another purchase, this time buying Atlanta-based RouteMatch software, so it can boost services offered to public transit agencies. No word on how much it's paying. Joan Doniger, Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
How long will it take for the economy to recover?
How many of them have remained on the job throughout this?
People are not going to be in public transportation.
Nobody knows.
You have received £600 million from the UK.
But we can promise the most complete information and the most detailed analysis.
The question is, what kind of recovery will it be?
Through every twist and turn.
Would you be wary of investment in China at this point?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The best of Bloomberg Business Week.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones. And you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Getting in the car on a cold winter's morning, you don't even want to touch the steering wheel. And by the time the car's heated up, you're already at your destination. At Honda, we listen to the chattering of teeth. And we made an app for the new Honda E. So you can control your car remotely, warming it up while you eat your toast, and checking its charge while finishing your coffee. The new Honda E. Honda, the power of dreams.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor activities, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Avoid shared surfaces like swings or benches. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The NFL conversation is too big for one host to handle. On the Ringer NFL Show, join a rotating cast of NFL experts for the latest news, analysis, and opinions on the league, along with special appearances from players, coaches, and more.
We are talking about something very near and dear to his heart because he's the one who helps put out the PFF player rankings every year, which is who is the best player in football. That's what we want to talk about today.
Search the Ringer NFL Show on TuneIn to listen.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll talk with the creator of HBO's I May Destroy You about how she turned an experience of assault into a comic drama.
I go round and round in circles, feeling comfort and then feeling like I'm in a state of shock at the fact that I'm sharing this story. And then I laugh about it because it's absurd.
Michaela Cole on the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen to this episode on TuneIn today.
Where do hockey and pop culture coexist?
So let me get this straight. You would be able to name more people
nostalgically than currently. This doesn't.
Come on, crazy. I know.
Other podcast, Puck Soup NHL analyst Greg Wyshynski, Sean McAdoo, and Ryan Lambert chase the conversational biscuit up and down the ice, skating between serious discussion on what's happening in pro hockey to irreverent opinions on movies, fast food, and life in general. Search Puck Soup on TuneIn to listen.
Want to get all your college sports news in one place? Turn on the Yahoo Sports College podcast to hear experts Dan Wetzel, Pat Forty, and Pete Thamel break down the latest NCAA stories from the football field to the basketball court and beyond.
I think Reggie should do a video of him running to Heritage Hall and front flipping in. Remember that famous front flipping the end zone that he did? Wasn't he the one who made that popular?
I think he
was.
I think he was, yeah. Search Yahoo College Sports Podcast on TuneIn to listen.
Casting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Hacks galore, it appears. Twitter getting hacked. We also have the Russians possibly hacking vaccine data from the UK, the US and Canada. We're going to be speaking to Clint Watts, Distinguished Research Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, on all of this potential crime that we're seeing. And of course, Barry Ritholtz will join us again for his weekly visit to Talk Markets. First, let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash from Greg Jarrett.
Tech-heavy NASDAQ dropped the most among U.S. benchmarks, Vonnie, with Microsoft, Apple leading the declines. The S&P 500 was in the red after 2 consecutive days of gains, with Bank of America falling after profits slid. Morgan Stanley gained as revenues and earnings jumped to an all-time high. Morgan Stanley Chairman and CEO James Gorman tells Bloomberg Tesla is not the key to reading the market.
Well, if you can tell me when the top of the market is, I'd be in a different business. So, no, the market reflects, future expectations on earnings, and that's what we have. Retail investors have clearly been more active. We've seen a lot of new investors coming into this market, as we saw whenever there's a period when the market's on fire, which it has been the last couple of months.
Morgan Stanley, by the way, is up 1.3%. We check the markets 1.3%. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P is down 0.6%, down 21. The Dow's down 0.3%, down 91. And the NASDAQ's down 1.5%, down 158. The 10-year is up 8.30 seconds, the yield 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate's now down 0.4% at 41.02 a barrel. COMEX Gold's also down 0.4% at 18.0630 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.11, the euro's $1.1430, and the British pound $1.2604. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, just over the last 24 hours, we've had a lot of news, it seems, about hacking of various computer systems. We had the Twitter hack, where a lot of big-name accounts were hacked on Twitter yesterday. Today, news that the UK, US, and Canada are jointly accusing Russia of cyber attacks against coronavirus research centers. So, again, cybersecurity right back in the fore, which we're fortunate now to have Clint Watts join us to talk about this. He's a Distinguished Research Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He's also Senior Fellow of the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security at George Washington University. Clint, thanks so much for joining us. I think I want to start with the allegations that the Russians have been trying to hack into some of the coronavirus testing sites. What do you know about that?
Yeah, it's not surprising. It's a little bit different for them. Traditionally, we think of the Chinese hacking for intellectual property. That's always been a big concern, particularly in the United States. But the truth of it is, whoever gets the vaccine first, or whoever can replicate it very cheaply and accelerate their ability to get that vaccine, not only are they going to be able to protect their own country and help their own country, but they will be able to really move economically as an exporter. It almost becomes a valuable asset for a country if they can gain that. So I think any of these countries that are lagging behind, that really don't have the ability to develop such a vaccine, are going to take targets. And one of the strategic assets the Russians have, we know this from election 2016 to now, is they use hackers prolifically to gain information. And the UK, at this point, not just today with the vaccines, but also announcing with their parliament interference from 2019. It seems to be a big target for Russia.
It does seem to be in the DNA, so to speak. But, Clint, isn't there an agreement among global superpowers, or the ones that once were superpowers, that there would be sharing? If there's, significant breakthroughs when it comes to vaccines and viruses, it's in everybody's interest to share this.
It is, but in this case, and it's interesting because that was really kind of Bill Gates' mandate, right? He was taking that on to make sure that all these vaccines could be used by everybody. But you have to look at it in terms of who's going to be able to have the capacity to develop it, who's going to have the economic structure and incentives behind it once they do develop it, and be able to distribute it rapidly and all over. And whatever country can get out in front of that first is going to have an advantage. You'd just be able to replicate it. You'd be able to make more of the vaccine. You'd be able to distribute it quicker, which gives you a leg up geopolitically across all countries. I do think there will be sharing, but just imagine in the United States right now what a dire need we have for a vaccine so that we can get back up on our feet. And if we had a competitor that could maybe hold that over our head to a different degree, it just becomes a strategic asset over time.
Clint, do we have any idea as to the protections, the security that the healthcare, some of these big pharma companies, biotech companies have, in place right now to protect kind of their testing and their results?
This is one of those interesting things where sector by sector, as a sector gets hit, the cybersecurity protections become better. So the first people to really get hit were banks and financials, right? And they stood up to it. You saw that with manufacturing next. But healthcare and the healthcare sector lagged, and so did research and development for a very long time. Many of the big companies are very good in terms of protecting their IP and their networks and their systems. However, you're talking about a global vaccine race where you see many companies coming online, probably companies that weren't traditionally even trying to pursue a vaccine that maybe have an ability to jump over trying to enter that market. You're probably going to see excessive.
Okay, I'm placing a stop on profit for Japanese yen at 107.103. Stop on profit at 107.103. It will give us £200 in profit. All right.
Russia hacking on vaccines potentially. We yesterday got some major accounts hacked at Twitter, and a Bitcoin scam going around. The likes of Bill Gates, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, they were all affected. Who might have been behind this? I mean, could it have been some kid with not very much to prove except that he could do this, or could it have been something more sinister, Clint?
I think it's definitely something more sophisticated than a one-off lucky hacker or individual. This seems to be an organized syndicate. What's strange is that they chose Bitcoiner as a Bitcoin sort of like aggregation operation. There's a lot of different ways to do cyber attacks to make money. That's not one that's necessarily the most profitable. But it did really illustrate a weakness or a vulnerability, which is if you can get inside Twitter's systems and you can gravitate towards and be able to manipulate accounts with a very high following, which is what they did. They really focused on outstanding influencers, big companies. If you have that ability, you can broadcast, you can enter into the information space in a very dynamic way. And so, this seems to be a financial scam, and I'm sure we'll get more for Twitter. But imagine had this been the day before the election or the day of the election. What if they had taken over media accounts like Bloomberg or any of the mainstream media outlets, right, and started putting out inauthentic results of elections or ballots? It would cause mass chaos in an election in a scenario like that.
We are going to have to continue this conversation. It is a fascinating one, and it will be with us throughout the election and beyond. Our thanks to you, Clint, there for joining us. Let's get now to our 99.1 studios and Nathan Hager.
Well, we'll start with the latest numbers on the coronavirus, Bonnie. Arizona has reported a 2.5% increase in infections. That's below the 7-day average. Also added 56 deaths. That's fewer than yesterday. But deaths in Florida hit a new one-day record of 156. The infection curve is still steepening there. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez says he can't rule out another lockdown.
It's important that we communicate with the business community before making any decisions. and I want to get their sentiments. I want to listen to them. I want to hear what they have to say. But I also want to stress to them the severity and the seriousness that we find ourselves in.
Meantime, the Republican National Committee may be bowing to the realities of Florida's pandemic. Party Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel says a scaled-down national convention will be held in Jacksonville next month with a mix of outdoor and indoor venues and only delegates allowed during the first 3 days. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is slamming President Trump's response to the outbreak.
Observing his behavior, I have concluded that he is like the man who refuses to ask for directions.
In her weekly news conference, Pelosi renewed her call for the president to invoke the Defense Production Act, and she also said an extension of unemployment insurance in the next round of stimulus is urgent. Hear more from the speaker. She joins Bloomberg Balance of Power coming up at 12:30 Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Debbie Hart is president of BioNJ, which represents the interests of more than 400 New Jersey-based biotech companies. She's also a strong voice in the biotech sector, supporting research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology. She sees NJIT as a valuable partner in attracting venture capital and biotech startups to the Garden State.
So the number one reason the companies come here to New Jersey for the biotech industry is for our talent. We estimate that there were about 30 biotech companies in the early 90s in New Jersey, about 80 in 1998. Today there are more than 400. And that growth continues, and it's come from every possible angle. Other countries, other states, they've spun out of our academic institutions as well as our biotech and our pharma companies, and we expect that growth to continue long into the future. And NJIT is a pipeline for talent, for companies, for entrepreneurs to do that important work.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband, Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up-to-date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
The world's financial decision makers.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Formula One is back.
F1 is back on Sky Sports.
It's lights out, and away we go.
And there's never been a season like this before.
How was that fast?
No one knows where this road leads, but it's going to be a hell of a ride.
Down the inside, oh, he can't stop into each other.
Are you ready?
Brilliant madness. An absolutely perfect race.
Watch every race live. Upgrade to Sky Sports F1 today. Go to sky.com/F1 for details.
Times Radio.
An exciting new national speech station is here.
Featuring live news,
analysis, conversation,
and the unequivocal world-beating journalism of The Times.
Join Asma Mir and me, Stig Abel.
I'm John Pienaar. Join me on Times Radio.
Join me, Mariella Frostrup.
I'm Giles Corrin.
Hello, I'm Kathy Newman.
This is Michael Portillo.
Join me, Carol Walker.
I'm Hugo Rifkind.
Times Radio is here.
Search Times Radio on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Braden and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
Who says only the experts get to do the talking? On the Scuttle Puck NHL Hockey Podcast, irreverent outsiders Mike Bond and Dale Horde give their untrained opinions on all things hockey from the fans' perspective.
I don't know how you get those guys out of there. And Crosby, as great as he's been, it's just such a different era, so it's tough with the... he didn't have the crazy number of points that Orr, Lemieux, and Gretzky did. They just...
Search Scuttle Puck on TuneIn to listen.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Sponsored by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm helping clients to be in a position of strength in the new reality of business. Learn more about their innovative solutions by visiting Witham.com. Tech shares have been leading U.S. stocks lower. Investors are rotating out of the top performers. The FANGs, treasuries are up, along with American initial jobless claims posting their smallest weekly gains since March. Let's look at a couple of those stocks right now. Netflix is down 1.4%. Apple is down 1.7%. Twitter has its own problems, down 0.7%. We check the main markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. The S&P is down 0.7%, down 23. The Dow's down 0.5%, down 125. The Nasdaq's down 1.4%, down 150. The 10-year is up 8/30 seconds. The yield 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.5% at 41 even per barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.3% at 1807.40 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.08. The euro $1.1432, and the British pound is $1.2617. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, given the market action that we've seen over the last couple of months, that bounce off the bottom, a lot of investors are asking themselves, how do I play this? Do I get in? Is it too late? Even Bill Miller said value stocks' advantages is probably short-lived. He's counting on a comeback for growth stocks. To get a sense of kind of maybe where we move from here, we welcome Barry Ritholtz, Bloomberg opinion columnist and host of Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. He's also founder and chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. Barry, thanks so much for joining us here. Bill Miller talking about growth stocks. What do you make of that?
So Bill Miller tells a fascinating story about his come-to-Jesus moment after the 87 crash. They had put together a nice track record, but in 87, 88, 89, they really were struggling, and he went back and reevaluated under what circumstances does value beat growth, and how can we better measure value? And they came up with a series of variations that are different than the traditional price-to-earnings ratio. One is straight-up return on capital. And as soon as they began to implement these, he had a spectacular run from 1991 to 2005, 15 consecutive years of a major fund beating the S&P 500. There's never been another streak like that in history. So
When Bill Miller says, hey, coming out of a recession, value is cyclical, it tends to be more sensitive to interest rates and to inflation, and it tends to do better, but in a very low yield environment, growth is going to have the advantage. So don't expect the value stocks to beat growth for very much longer.
And Barry has now done 2 Masters in Business podcasts with the legendary Bill Miller. I can't recommend them enough. Some things that you really would not expect to be in there, including what Barry has just voiced about, a legendary value investor talking about growth stocks so much. So, Barry, what about the FANGs? I mean, are we due for sort of a rollover?
I keep seeing these comparisons between the run-up of the FANG stock and the dot-com collapse in the late 1990s. Everybody wants to draw the wrong lesson from the implosion we saw in 2000. And I think there are several really specific differences that are important to note. The first is in the 90s, the tech stocks had 1,000% appreciation over 5 years. Over the past 5 years, the big tech stocks are up about 175%. That's a huge difference. It was 5 times more aggressive back then than it is today. So that's number one. Second, you cannot help but look at the big tech stocks and notice, dear Lord, these are cash machines. Microsoft and Apple and Google and Facebook, they are just printing money. And now you throw in Netflix, Amazon, another one, just gaining market share, printing money. And on top of everything else, Amazon Cloud Services is a big profit engine. So very different era today with not only revenue but profits versus the 90s. Certainly a big difference. But I think the difference that explains why the market is confounding people to such a large degree. People look around and they see the U.S. economy is not doing great. It's improving, but it's still wildly off from where it was this time last year or even, January, February. And the reopening has gone poorly. We've bungled the whole COVID-19 management. But you look around the rest of the world, and places like Germany and South Korea and Taiwan and China are all doing a better job than we are. And to tie that back to the FANGs, to tie that back to the big tech companies, these companies derive the majority of their revenues from non-U.S. sources. Apple, most of all, as much as 60% in some quarters. Microsoft, Facebook, Google in the, about half, maybe a little more. Amazon, Netflix also a little more. Amazon is the laggard because so much of the retail sales between Whole Foods and the delivery service is in the U.S. So not only are most of the big tech companies getting the majority of their revenues from overseas, but overseas is their fastest growth markets also. It really explains why we could have such a mediocre economy in the U.S. and why the big tech stocks are doing so well. It's not as irrational as it appears.
So, Barry, I think a lot of folks would agree with you that the U.S. Federal government has bungled, to use your term, the response to COVID-19. At some point, do the markets need to see some significant coordination improvement here to move higher? Because it seems like, despite some of the weaknesses that we've seen in key markets like California, Texas, Florida, the market's been generally pretty nonchalant about this flare-up here.
Yeah, so some of that is the improvement overseas. Some of that is we were expecting a second wave in the fall, and I think some people are incorrectly considering this a second wave. This is just an extension of the first wave. And I can't help but feel that the run of very positive news about the various vaccines, Moderna is one, and the one out of Oxford is the other, and the improving treatments for people even if they do catch coronavirus, kind of has people looking past this flare-up and the fall flare-up to, hey, we're very likely to have, by this time next year, there should be some sort of a widespread vaccine. That's a fair guess from a non-doctor, and I think a lot of the investors share my lack of qualifications to opine on this. But it appears that we're moving in the right direction on the medical treatment, even if we mess up the reopening and we mess up the herd immunity. There'll be a magic bullet that will allow us to return to normal sometime in the future. And 2020, just the market seems to be saying, hey, it's a mulligan, just forget about it. Let's look towards 2021 and 2022.
Barry, always amazing chatting with you. I wanted to talk to you sometime about Robinhood as well, because apparently yesterday we saw the Robinhood traders jump on the Moderna bandwagon as well, and so we'll have to see how that plays out. But Barry is always full of really down-to-earth, interesting market thoughts. He's founder of Riddles Wealth Management. He's also, of course, a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and he is also host of Masters in Business. And do go and have a look at those Bill Miller Masters in Business podcasts that he put out. One is for a couple of years ago and the other is just this week. So really interesting stories there from Bill Miller, a legendary investor. Barry Riddles, thank you. From myself, Paul Sweeney, and producer Sam Lenga and Ken Fellew, thanks for joining. We'll have more markets tomorrow right here on Bloomberg Radio.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings. You need more than a soundbite. You need some...
As we open things up again, how do we keep safe? Max runs a cafe.
We've worked really hard to make the coffee shop COVID safe. Keep 2 meters apart, or 1 meter with extra precautions. Follow our new one-way system. Use the extra hand sanitizer. And try to stay at your table as much as possible. We can't wait to welcome everyone back. But please, remember the safety guidelines so we can all stay open.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Moonpig, we've got making people happy down to a science. How? With flowers. Research shows that whether small blossoms or giant blooms, roses or peonies, receiving bouquets of any formation causes our bodies to produce endorphins, or the happy chemical. Thank you, Professor. And you too can harness the power of flowers with Moonpig. It's easy. Send a beautiful hand-tied bouquet of happiness straight from our app with just a couple of taps. Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Where do hockey and pop culture coexist?
So let me get this straight. You would be able to name more people nostalgically than currently? This doesn't...
Come on.
It's
crazy. I know.
Other podcast, Puck Soup NHL analyst Greg Wyshynski, Sean McAdoo, and Ryan Lambert chase the conversational biscuit up and down the ice, skating between serious discussion on what's happening in pro hockey to irreverent opinions on movies, fast food, and life in general. Search Puck Soup on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, we'll talk with the creator of HBO's I May Destroy You about how she turned an experience of assault into a comic drama.
I go round and round in circles, feeling comfort and then feeling like I'm in a state of shock at the fact that I'm sharing this story. And then I laugh about it because it's absurd.
Michaela Cole on the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen to this episode on TuneIn today.
At Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From
New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. Later in the program, we're going to have an exclusive talk with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. But right now, let's check on the markets. For that, we go to Abigail Doolittle. So, Abigail, they're coming off some, but the real story, I thought, was the big tech. The big tech is sort of losing its luster right now.
Big tech continues to lose its luster, David. And this has been a tension that we've been talking about for a little while. Over the last few days, we have seen a healthy move into some of those recovery and reopening cyclical sectors. On the other hand, we've seen the mega cap tech stocks simply slide. So we have the S&P 500 right now down about 0.6%, breaking its two-day rally to the upside. Morgan Stanley, they put up a tremendous quarter, beating revenues by 21%, better than the best quarter ever. So imagine that during the pandemic. So really great performance. On the other hand, Amazon down for a fourth day in a row, the first time we've seen that since May, down 1.5%. And that really, David, is just a case of too far, too fast. And your point of big tech, that FANG index, once again down 1.7%. If you can believe it, David, from the low in March to the recent high, that FANG index up more than 100%. So we're seeing some healthy consolidation. The question is whether or not there's more to go. And if yes, there could be some big pressure here on the indexes.
Well, I can believe it, Abigail, because I read it in your note a short while ago, so I know it must be true. But give us a sense. Big tech is one thing, and it's gone up an awful long way. But can it come down without taking the rest of the equities down with it?
Very difficult, because relative to the S&P 500, some of those big cap tech names, about 20% weighting to the S&P 500. The NASDAQ 100, and the reason that we have the underperformance for that index right now down more than 1.5%, 40% of its weighting goes to those big tech names. One concern, David, we have Chinese stocks weak for a third day in a row, the worst stretch since early February. And over the...
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm moving again my Japanese yen stop and profit down to 107.083. If it will reach this level, we will have nicely collect 400 pounds in profit. Okay, so we sold short at 107.123. We put stop on profit 107.083. Okay, we have every pip equals 100 pounds. 40 pips equals 400 pounds. Okay, let's see.
So what should we read into this? Is President Trump now concluding that maybe he is behind after all?
Yeah, I mean, a big shakeup and not unexpected, right? I mean, we saw this coming when the Tulsa rally had a turnout of about 6,000 with a sea of empty seats that frustrated the president. And then, of course, in the wake of all of these polls that have come out showing Biden with a double-digit lead nationally and leading in most of the swing states, about 11 of the swing states have him with a big lead. I think it's a recognition on the part of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, that the campaign does need to make up ground here. So we saw Pascal, as you mentioned, demoted. He's the guy, Pascal, he's the guy who came in with all the digital component that helped them win in 2016. And he's being replaced by more of an insider, Bill Stepien, somebody that the Trump campaign really trusts, and somebody who we understand is arguing that the campaign needs to really go negative on Joe Biden. So we may see some of that coming down the pike as he takes over. But of course, the real person in charge is the president and, of course, Jared Kushner, and that hasn't changed at all.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. I mean, I guess Mr. Pascal will still keep doing the digital that he originally did for President Trump. But who's calling the shots? Obviously, Donald J. Trump is ultimately calling the shots. But I read a lot about Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, really running the thing day to day, having all the meetings and calling all the shots even before Mr. Pascal stepped down.
Yeah, absolutely. Jared Kushner, he's the one who really was responsible for Pascal's, ascendance in the campaign. And, of course, he did a very good job on the digital side in 2016. And he still remains as the person really in charge right next to or under the president, if you will. And that has not changed. But I do think we are starting to see signs that the campaign recognizes early voting begins in 6 to 8 weeks. And the national polls may not matter as much, but when you're that far behind in every poll nationally, and then you look at these swing states, and you look at his loss among certain constituencies like white uneducated voters, he's still ahead, but he has lost dramatically from where he was in 2016, and that's a big red flag for the campaign. And of course, we're starting to hear whispers that Republicans are vulnerable in the Senate. You're going to talk to Nancy Pelosi. If Democrats take the House and the Senate and the White House, of course, there are big changes afoot for everything from the economy to infrastructure to education. So that would be a big change, and those numbers have got to be frustrating for the campaign.
No question about it, and it's all about this polls at the moment. We still have a long way to go because those polls could move around, as you know better than anyone, Jeannie. At the same time, the reports are President Trump particularly is disturbed by the Fox News polls. He pays attention to those, and those aren't looking so good either. At the same time, you pointed out, Jeannie, a Monmouth poll that actually looked at Pennsylvania and came up with an interesting phenomenon where it looked like Vice President Biden had a substantial lead, but if you ask Pennsylvania voters how they think it's going to come out, they're not quite so sure because they think a lot of their fellow voters are really going to vote for Trump, even though they're not saying so.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fascinating where, of course, Biden is winning. He's up about 8, depending on which poll you look at in the swing state of Pennsylvania. And, of course, Donald Trump won that in 2016. But fascinating, many of the registered voters there said they were surprised when Trump won in 2016, and they would not be quite as surprised this time because, as you mentioned, there seemed to be this cadre of neighbors they have who are secret Trump supporters. They won't admit it because it makes them sound racist or sexist or whatever label you want to put on it. But let's keep in mind, Trump still is pretty far ahead, depending on which poll you look at. He's still doing well on the economy, and there is a thought that perhaps for that reason alone, that you're going to see people who will still support him when it comes time to vote in secret. And so that is something we're hearing about from Pennsylvania, and it will be interesting to hear if we see similar concerns out of Democrats in other swing states, and particularly independents.
And, of course, in 2016, President Trump actually won in Pennsylvania by a narrow margin, but won. And if you look at the polls then in 2016 compared to now, it was roughly the same where Hillary Clinton was back in those days.
Yeah, absolutely. And we remember watching, starting to see those numbers come in and thinking this is not at all what we were promised by the polls. And, Democrats have been really shaken by what happened in 2016. And there are a lot of Democrats and Republicans, quite frankly, who say you can't trust the polls. That, and I don't happen to believe this, by the way, but there are a lot of people who say you can't trust the polls because they simply aren't capturing what is going on with people. You remember, Nixon and others used to call them, sort of these secret voters, this sort of spiral of silence, people who won't go out and admit publicly to how they really feel, but when the time comes, they're going to vote another way. And that is something that's sort of hanging over this entire campaign of uncertainty.
Okay, Jeannie, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. That's Jeannie Zaino, our political contributor here at Bloomberg and also a professor of political science at Iona College. Coming up next on Balance of Power, managing a major industrial company successfully through an economic downturn. Well, Dave Cote has done it as CEO of Honeywell, and he has now written a book on it. He's here to tell us all about it. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Do you know you might be overpaying for your Medicare supplement plan? Do you get lost in an alphabet maze of plans like A, B, C, D, and G, F? Would you like help getting out of the maze and finding the very best plan for you? We are experienced Medigap agents at Health IQ, and we are on a mission to give people like you fair and square Medigap rates. Health IQ is the only insurance agency that rewards seniors proactively working on their health, like eating right and exercising. You don't have to be an athlete to save money. We reward healthy lifestyles of all kinds. Do you take your vitamins and supplements? Do you stay active and in the know about things that impact your health? If so, you could save money with Health IQ. Let us help you take care of your Medicare supplement needs. To see if you qualify for exclusive savings on Medicare supplement insurance, go to healthiq.com/Medigap. To start saving, go to healthiq.com/Medigap. That's HEALTHIQ.com/MEDIGAP.
Health IQ is an agency offering plans from different insurance carriers. No government or Medicare affiliation, coverage, and special rates not available in all counties or cases.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Sponsored by SEI. Crises emphasize character and partnership. One mission, one community. SEI. Go to SEIC.com/IMS. Tech shares are leading U.S. stocks lower, with investors continuing to rotate out of this year's top performers. Treasuries have gained, with American initial jobless claims posting their smallest weekly decline since the month of March. We check the numbers every 15 minutes. S&P is down 0.6%, down 20. The Dow's down 0.5%, down 123, and the Nasdaq's down 1.2%, down 130. The 10-year is up 8/32 with a yield of 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude is down 0.7% at 40.92 a barrel, with COMEX gold down 0.3% at 18.0830 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.05, the euro $1.1434, and the British pound $1.2624. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Now more Bloomberg Balance.
With the shift to remote working, video conferencing has become the new normal to keep your business running. But is it reliable and secure? Cisco WebEx is committed to the highest security standards and already trusted by both small businesses and many of the world's largest organizations. Call, message, and meet securely with Cisco WebEx. Sign up at cisco.uk/work-from-home. When secure remote work is critical, WebEx is essential.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Say others in the past because of the health issue. So that, of course, has to come first. That being said, all recessions are the same in that they're all painful and unpleasant. They just are, and that's why I used to say that's why they call it a recession and they don't call it a party. That being said, there's things that I think are important to think about in any recession if you're a leader. The first one is not to panic. And it's a very easy thing to do when everybody around you, no offense, but the media, the people that you work with, are all panicking over it, talking about it. Don't panic yourself. Try to keep a level head. Second one, be able to still think independently. And I'm fond of saying that the ability to think independently is a lot more rare than being smart. And there's a lot of smart people who can tell you why things are the way they are, but focus on looking at it and making an independent decision. The third one, don't forget about your customer. Because when it comes to both surviving the short term and the long term, customers will remember. So make sure you stay focused on them. The fourth one would be, even in the middle of a recession, be thinking about planning for recovery, including all those long-term projects that you had going that were going to support customers. Now, it's easier said than done. As I'm fond of saying, when you're up to your butt in alligators, it's tough to remember the original goal was to drain the swamp. That being said, the swamp is still there, and it's still going to be there when you go into the recovery. So as a leader, even if you've got 120 hours worth of work and 80 hours to do it, you have to find a way to take an hour or two to get your head above the fray, look around, and make sure you're still doing the right things to position yourself for recovery.
So, Dave, let me pick up on one of those particularly, and that is, remember your customer, focus on your customer, because even as big industrial companies right now are having their own problems, their customers are having problems as well. You tell a great story in your book about having been told that you were on good terms with one of the Honeywell customers, and then when you actually asked them, you found out they were about to sue you.
Yeah, that was quite a shock. I was very big on doing a great job on customer service, and we improved a lot, and we still have a ways to go. It's one of those things you're never done with. But I've been assured by all the businesses that we were doing better and everything was fine. And we were at the one of the air shows, and we went to visit a customer, because I always like to hear it directly. And it was me, the business president, the sales manager, and the product manager. And the question that I always would start with any customer was, and I was there to talk about some new stuff, but I always start with, so how are we doing with what you've already given us? And the customer looked at me and said, well, I'm glad you stopped by, because we've just about finalized the lawsuit that we're planning on filing against you, and it should be done in about 2 weeks, and we just wanted you to know. And I was incredulous. I looked at the business president, the product manager, the sales manager, None of them were aware of this. And then I just started to do the uppity kind of thing with the customer, say, please give me some time and let me figure this thing out so that I make sure we perform. Well, thank God we were able to perform, hold on to the customer, avoid the lawsuit. But it sure pointed out how important it is, whether it's good times or tough times, stay close to your customer, make sure they're happy.
So, Dave, when you have tough times like this, I understand the idea of not panicking now and keeping an eye over on the horizon. How do you make sure you've got the cash to do that? Because you may really be pushed pretty hard. How do you manage things like dividends? How do you manage things like stock buybacks? How do you make sure you have money to invest at the same time that your business is in a downturn?
Well, the first priority has to be protection of the entity itself, the business. Because if you don't protect that and you get hung up on, well, wait a minute, I can't lay off employees, I can't furlough employees, I can't cut the dividend, you end up in a horrible place where everybody is unhappy. So I always start first with what's the right thing for the company long term. And if you look at that and say, look, I'm going to have to cut the dividend, I am going to have to furlough people, I just do, because if I don't, the entity is not going to be there. So I always start with what's important for the long-term protection of the business, because that's what's going to benefit customers, employees, and investors long-term.
So, Dave, one of the questions right now that's really prevalent, given what's going on, not just with the pandemic, with China and trade with China, are supply lines. Supply lines seem to be getting reconfigured. You had an awful lot of business, for example, in China that you really developed over there in China at Honeywell. What do you think about the situation with supply lines right now? Are we going to fundamentally change those? Are we going to be much less dependent, for example, on China going forward?
Well, I'd say there's an important issue that needs to be addressed. And we have to be careful that this doesn't turn into this xenophobic impulse in every country, everywhere, and that'll be extremely damaging. What we have learned about supply chains is that they were more fragile than we ever expected. Totally independent of China, just overall more fragile. If you have a single source of supply, whether it's an internal or external component, there's only one country it comes out of, and that country has an issue, you have a fragile supply line. So there's a revisit that's going to have to go for everybody's supply chain to say, can I make it more robust? So in the event of any kind of disaster, pandemic or otherwise, I have an alternate source of supply and I can recover. The thing that worries me is that legitimate issue can be pushed into everything has to be done domestically. Whatever country you're in, you have to be able to do it there. That would be a mistake because we don't then take advantage of each other's country's strengths and weaknesses. And we need to be able to focus on those strengths in order to have a great supply chain that can very well be global. It just needs to be robust.
Dave, it's very much in fashion right now to talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. There's another thing you really had to contend with at Honeywell. You had a lot of contingent liability having to do with the environment in particular. And you really invested in that. Particularly, you've got a great story again in the book up in Syracuse on Lake Onondaga.
Yeah. I think it's part of the untold story is a lot of people will look at Honeywell and say, wow, did very well. Market cap went from 20 billion to 120 billion. Overall return of 800%, 2.5 times the S&P 500 over 16 years. That part is obviously good. The thing that doesn't get told so much, though, is that at that same time, we spent $10 billion to, number one, have an overfunded pension plan, so we maintained fidelity with all our retirees. We addressed all of our asbestos claims, and even tougher, we fixed all the issues associated with a 100-year-old chemical company, for which the strategy up to that point had been fight it in court until you lose and then pay. So I'm a big believer in if you've got those kinds of legacy issues, you have to address them. You have a license to operate from society. It's not how employees want to think about themselves or the company that they work for. You have to be able to address them. That being said, I got to admit, I'm a little worried nowadays when I see all the stakeholder discussion. And I remember when the BRT issued their statement, I thought, well, it's no big deal. I mean, anybody who was running their company right, did pay attention to other constituencies like communities and, of course, employees and others. But it seems to have gotten carried away to the point where the share owner is now at the bottom of the list. And I always viewed it as if you're doing the right thing for the share owner, you are also looking at all these other issues and constituencies in order to have a great company long term. And that's where I think we need to be focused, because companies need to be driving productivity. And if you drive productivity...
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we close position on Japanese yen at 107.083. And as you can see, we earned 400 pounds. So we started right here. We closed it. Closed here. And that's it. We made 400 pounds. For anybody who wants to get the strategy, you can check the link in the description, or you can go to company.co.uk website, where you can find the link to the strategy and you can purchase and you can start trading. After you will get the strategy, you need to practice for a couple of weeks in order to master your day trading skills. So what we suggest to follow our trades, live trades on our channel, and to see basically to add the strategy to the charts, and you will see when we buy, why we buy, how we buy, and how much you're going to spend. Also, you will learn to do arbitrage, quantitative trading, everything basically what is right now profitable to trade. Okay, speak to you later.
Just tell me, what's that one thing? That's where the mistake begins. It's always two things.
Well, I can tell you there's no intellectual laziness in this book. That's Dave Cody. Thanks so much for being with us. Former CEO, very successful CEO of Honeywell, now the successful author of a new book, Winning Now, Winning Later. Coming up here, we'll have our exclusive interview with the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She is Nancy Pelosi. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
I've always wanted to learn another language. What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops? Oh, you look lovely in that. What about a nice lunch? Fish and chips, please.
Salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense?